In England, the immediate enemies of truthfulness and hence of freedom of thought are the press lords, the film magnates, and the bureaucrats. But that in the long view, the weakening of the desire for liberty among the intellectuals themselves is the most serious symptom of all. The Press Scrutiny Board had the power to refuse any works by particular writers' publication anywhere by any means. So even though a writer is not in prison, he or she has very limited freedom, not only in creating literature but in publishing it. Those two quotes reveal and criticize the same reality. Freedom of speech in literature is the victim of politic and corporate entities but also the prey of the writer's fear of being censored. The first quote is from George Orwell, a worldwide known novelist and journalist, in his essay Prevention of Literature, written in 1946. The second quote is from the speech of Matida, the president of PEN Myanmar and winner of multiple literature prizes at the Edinburgh World Writers' Conference in 2013. Those two quotes are more than 70 years apart in time. George Orwell has written his essay in the context of the recent end of the Second World War, but his critique is still relevant today. Why? Because today's literature still does not have true freedom of speech. To understand how freedom of speech in literature is still an issue today, as odd as it may sound like, it is crucial to first understand what is literature and what is its purpose. Literature includes novels, short stories, biographies, newspaper, magazines, and more. But what is the general point of it all? As Kim Thuy says, a known author of today's French-speaking culture, literature is to immortalize the ephemeral. In other words, literature exists to influence the feelings and thoughts of the one who reads. The author uses his work as a vessel for his own point of view and tries to make his reader feel what he feels at this very moment. This is why freedom of the intellect means the freedom to report what one has seen, heard, and felt, and not to be obliged to fabricate imaginary facts and feelings. In this modern society, politics is the first pillar against literature's freedom of speech. Of course, laws and publishing processes are different according to regions and countries. Nevertheless, nowhere there is a system with complete and perfect respect of the intellect's integrity. Also, the censorship of some works in a country has a worldwide effect, as it denies a part of its society and therefore creates misinformation about it. So, why is politics an obstacle for the writers? Another shares his point of view through his texts, whether it is with one or multiple characters, the narrator, or the stylistic choices. The low-level literature as an exception, a text necessarily drives political or social views and opinions even when the point of the text is not to criticize and it simply uses the historical context for the purpose of the story. However, when a political party obtains the power of a country and needs to push its agenda, it needs control over its population. To have control and power, the political party needs to control the opinion of the general public. The point of literature being to share what the author feels. Any work where the reader can feel that the author is opposed to the society and or the politic state will be censored by the political party. It is hard to believe, but here are some examples. In 1993, the Burmese author Matida is sentenced to 20 years in prison for endangering public peace, having contact with illegal organizations, and distributing unlawful literature. In fact, Matida was involved in the campaign of Aung San Suu Kyi against the military government. When Matida published her book about her thoughts on the political situation, the government got an opportunity to take her down and therefore weaken the campaign of Aung San Suu Kyi. The government released Matida in 1999, but it was not by their free will. It was instead because of an accumulating pressure from human rights organizations in other countries. Ilan Kundera, another well-known author, had his Czech nationality officially denied by the government in 1979 because of his stories revealing the alienation of the population, its issues, and the political controversies. His texts were at the time even declared non-existent. Today, Czechoslovakia still has not given back Kundera's nationality and has still not allowed his texts to be printed in the country. Once again, direct censorship because of political institutions is not everywhere a reality. Politics is not always what restrains the intellectual integrity in literature. Particularly in America's countries, it is the companies that are, by direct and indirect means, censoring literature. Why and how? The first question is simple. Like a political party, the companies need a good image in the general public's mind to keep it buying their products or services. But, unlike government, the companies use various ways to mute a writer. Here are three of the main methods they use. 1. The blacklist system. The blacklist of a company contains the names of the journalists and popular personalities who in the past gave bad press to the company. Anyone on this list won't receive any benefits, sponsorship, invitations to events, review copies, etc. etc. Michael Gunn, the technology journalist, exposes on his blog Cult of Mac how Apple censors the medias with this method. He says that, even though the system is nuanced, criticizing Steve Jobs, Apple's history and culture, or super harshly criticizing the products will gain most journalists lifelong inclusion on the blacklist. Being overly speculative, writing with too much certainty about Apple rumors, or speculating about Apple's motivation in a negative way will usually get reporters and editorialists on the list. As he later develops, the censorship method has incredible impacts on as it promotes the self-censorship of the journalist who wants to gain in popularity and build a career. It makes honest people lie. The second censorship method of the companies is to file a lawsuit against the author or publisher. This method is far less popular than the first one, but the only threat and fear of a lawsuit is enough to censor any author. The American attorney Amy Cook, specialized in literature, writes in her 2016 article, A Writer's Guide to Defamation and Invasion of Privacy. When you sign a publishing contract, you promise that your work will not defame anyone or invade anyone's privacy, along with a number of other assurances, and you agree to indemnify the publisher in the event of a lawsuit against your work. She then specifies that in a situation where what is written in the book is true, the company or person suing can hardly win. On the other hand, Amy Cook also explains that an opinion about a real-life person or group given without facts in a novel is only legally allowed when it serves the story, the development of the characters, or the context. So, is it right to assume that a writer, knowing these facts, should not be afraid of a lawsuit even if it happens? No. A lawsuit can cost a lot of money, affect the reputation of the writer, and have an immense impact on the career of the author, even in the eventuality of the writer winning in court. This fact that any company referred to in the text can file a lawsuit against the author and have so much impact on him is what creates fear and represses the freedom of speech of any author. Also, let's recall that Amy Cook was using the laws and definitions of the United States. This country has a fair definition of defamation. On the other hand, a country like India, for example, does not include saying the truth as a valid argument for defamation, and therefore gives even more power to the companies suing writers revealing or discussing some controversial topics about them. Finally, the third censorship method of the companies is to own the media. Whether it is by becoming the media, buying it, or sponsoring it, companies can have the power to control the information given out to the public. In his essay, George Orwell discussed the problem of the press being owned by only a few rich persons who could dictate the media's opinion. Well, the matter still has not changed today. Now the vast majority of all medias, newspaper, music, television, films, and the internet, is owned by a total of 6 companies: Disney, Time Warner, Sony, Comcast, National Amusements, and News Corp. These companies push their agendas through the media they own and can use them to make shots at other companies. As this has repercussions on a lot of social spheres, let's focus here on what is only affecting literature. First, a journalist from one of the media owned by these companies would not write something against the company because this would affect his career by closing to him the doors to higher ranks or notoriety. Also, companies can sponsor or bribe media they do not own to make it shut its mouth on some controversies, and publishers owned by these companies will modify texts before publishing them so they all fit the company's aesthetic or guidelines. This power to censor or modify any text to make them fit the company's mindset reduces the freedom of speech in literature because the authors have to adapt to the standards and learn to not talk about the subjects and themes the company dislikes. Overall, the restrictions that politics and companies impose the freedom of speech in literature have now been exposed. Although, one could say that an author has freedom of speech as long as he understands what his country and publishers don't like. But still, there is a problem. Like George Orwell says at the very end of his essay, imagination, like certain wild animals, will not breed in captivity. Any writer or journalist who denies that fact is, in effect, demanding his own destruction. So, what are the options of the society or writers in order to free literature? Continue to dare outrage the system and never let your career be dependent on moral codes you do not agree with. Everyone needs to also participate in manifestations or petitions that help pointing out injustices made toward writers. Only with time and the collaboration of the communities will literature gain true freedom of speech.